Public Affairs. This is the University of Minnesota's Public Affairs and Public Policy School. I'm Larry Jacobs. I'm a faculty here at the University of Minnesota. A couple just housekeeping items. First, I used to say shut off your cell phones, but I've been corrected. I know people are tweeting, and that's obviously not only fine, but it's good. But do silence your cell phones. We don't want you to be embarrassed if it were to go off, and then all of us would stare at you. So please do silence your cell phones so you can be spared that embarrassment. This is being recorded for later rebroadcast and being videoed for later rebroadcast. Please use question cards. We want to get us to as many questions as we possibly can. Well, we're back at it. Just as Minnesota was kind of getting over the scars of the 2008 recount, and after we've just passed, just a few months ago, a series of important reforms, both in law and in rules, we're back at looking at recount. We're here today to look at what's happened, but more importantly, what will happen. What are the steps in the recount process from the canvassing boards to the recount itself and to possible steps beyond that? What are the key points that you should be looking for? There will be moments of particular significance along the way. We want to try to highlight what those particularly important moments will be. We'll also talk about what's different about 2010 versus the last round of recounting 2 years ago. How have things changed? We may also get into discussions about the prospects of each of the gubernatorial candidates in terms of, in Mr. Emmer's case, overcoming his 8,700 vote deficit, or in the case of Mr. Dayton, maintaining his lead. We are very fortunate to have with us today a terrific group of people. If you want to know about what's going on in election reform, and particularly in the recount, I cannot think of a better group of people to have explaining it to us. We're going to break this into two panels. There will not be a break. We're just going to roll right from one into another. The first panel is going to look at the process of the recount, from canvassing to the actual recount. The second panel will look at some of the legal issues that we might be facing. I want to introduce our panel. Closest to me is Kevin Corbid, who is the Director of Property, Record, and Taxpayer Services in Washington County for the past 9 years. His office coordinates election functions for Washington County. And then one over is Rachel Smith, who's the election manager for Hennepin County. And then Joe Mansky, who is the election manager for Ramsey County. And I want to start by welcoming Joe Mansky to start us off with a discussion of the process and some of the key steps. Mr. Mansky.
Thanks, Larry. And I think the way that I'll approach this today, because it's probably what you're really interested in, is this going to be a replay of 2008? And maybe more to the point, how is this different than 2008? So let's just use that as our point of departure. First of all, this is not a presidential election. And that means a couple of things. Number one, we have a whole lot less voters. Remember, last year being 2008, that was a record voter turnout year for us. Statewide, over 2.9 million people voting, and a lot of first-time voters voted in that election. Today, at least as the result of our canvass in Ramsey County this afternoon, I can tell you that the turnout this year was the lowest that it's been since 1994. And as a consequence of that, the people who likely voted in this election is more of our core voting population, which is to say people who are accustomed to voting year in, year out, and know what to do with one of our ballots when you put it in their hand. And I think as a consequence, one of the differences that we should see this year, if we do get to the recount phase, is there should be fewer improperly marked ballots, not simply as a consequence of there being fewer ballots cast, but also as a consequence of having more experienced voters, people who are more experienced using our voting system, marking those ballots. So that's one thing that you might want to keep an eye out for as you are standing as an observer or watching this as things go on. And then what about the recount process generally? What's different about that from 2 years ago? The laws have changed in some small but I think significant ways. And probably the biggest change from your perspective as a voter and an observer is the whole business about making challenges to ballots based on whether or not they were identified in some fashion by the voter. And I think most of you remember 2 years ago that there was a big discussion which resulted in many thousands of challenge ballots based on small marks made in various locations on the ballot. Given the laws changed, those types of challenges will no longer be allowed. And in fact, the law concerning how a ballot would be identified have been pretty well defined now, so that a challenge for a ballot based on the fact that it was identified has to have a person's name written on it, a person's name printed on it, or some sort of an identification number printed on it. But those will all be valid challenges. But the stray marks and the things of that nature are no longer challengeable under the law that as it exists today. Another change in the law, which I find interesting, and I'm glad it happened, was that the state also essentially codified a cultural practice that I have used for many years, and that is to meet with the representatives of the candidates at the end of each day, and to go through the challenge ballots of the day and see if there was a way to either waive or to drop some of the challenges. And so that is now, the law now permits that, in fact authorizes that. And it's not to say that they will want to do that, but if they do, we will certainly be willing to go through the challenge ballots on a daily basis. And I think the other big difference between this year and 2 years ago is not so much having to do with the recount per se, but with the handling of the absentee ballots. And again, I think this was something that was in the news a lot, probably more in the canvassing and the trial phase than in the recount in particular. But as you may recall from 2 years ago, in many precincts in the state, all the absentees were sent out to the polling place, where they were then compared against applications, opened, counted, and so on. And because of the large volume of mail that comes in on election day, and because of a record number of absentee ballots, many of these ballots did not arrive at their polling place until very late in the day, and as a consequence, many mistakes were made in their processing. This year, the legislature took some advice from our group and decided that all the absentees would be processed at central locations and would be counted centrally. And I think as a consequence of that, at least I can report to you that from Ramsey County, we have no, and to use a very unfortunate term, and I hope to never you hear this term again, the improperly rejected absentees. I'm happy to report to you we have none of them, and I hope that we never ever see or hear of them again. But I think that's a real benefit of doing that centrally, and I can't tell you how many of our judges came up to me during the training this year and thanked us for taking the absentees off their hands, because it really got to the point where it was really a burden. And so I think in a nutshell, those 2 or 3 things are probably the biggest changes from your standpoint as observers of this process, and frankly from our standpoint as those who have to make this process work.
Thank you, Joe Mansky. I'm wondering if you could just break this down a little bit more for folks who haven't followed this closely, in terms of the everyday steps, in particular the canvassing and what canvassing entails. A lot of people are confused about what is canvassing and what is that process. What's the distinction between the different steps from going from the current unofficial tally to how do we get to an official tally? Can you walk us through each of those steps that's going to lead us to the official tally?
Sure. It's kind of interesting, and I'm going to use my words guardedly, because I see a number of current and former members of the House of Representatives sitting in front of me here and way in the back there. So I need to be a little careful about what I say, but I think it's fair to say that all of us on the panel here are under a lot of pressure to have instant results on election night. And I think the reality is that we are putting information out on our website which we have not had the opportunity to proof or to vet or whatever verb you want to use, because there is a great demand in the community for instant results. So as a consequence of that, one of the changes, again, that we recommended that the legislature make this year, which they did, was to expand the period that we had from election day to the day on which we do the canvass. And the canvass is the process that we go through to verify all the results and to make them official. And so let me describe basically what happens. On the day after the election, what we do is receive the documents back from all of our polling places, and what the judges are doing there is working down two different independent but closely related lines of work. One of them is to determine how many people voted, and we determine that number by figuring out how many people walked in the door and signed our polling place rosters. And I think all of you know what I'm talking about. It's that document, that computer printout that you sign in order to get a voter receipt. So that's how we determine how many people actually voted in the election. To that, we then compare that with the number of ballots that we have in the box. And of course, ideally, in a better world than we live in, there should be exactly the same number of ballots as there are voters. That does not always happen for a number of reasons. For example, there are ballots that get jammed in the ballot counter, and the judges are not always certain whether the ballot was counted or not, and so their inclination many times is to reinsert the ballot, and occasionally that will create a situation where it appears that we have more ballots than we have voters. We also have a situation where we give the voter a ballot and they spoil it and walk away and don't get another ballot, or they just take the ballot and put it in their pocket and walk out of the polling place. And I've seen both of these phenomena happen. And of course, what that makes it appear after the election is that we have more voters than ballots. So what we try to do is to reconcile those numbers and to get to the point where we feel that we can accurately match up the voters and the ballots. And then the canvass is our way formally of doing that. The other thing that we are now looking at is to make sure that all the absentees were correctly processed. And again, that ballots that should have been counted on election day are counted, in fact. And those are the activities that we do, that we have been doing for the last week, and which lead us to the point where we can then say, here are the number of voters we had, here are the number of votes that were counted.
Could you just say, Joe Mansky, one word about what the post-election audit is and how that fits into this process you've just described?
Yeah, the post-election audit is something that we started back in 2006, and it is a direct outcome of the events in Ohio during the 2004 presidential election, where there was some question about the accuracy of the vote counting in that election. And as I recall, the margin between Bush and Kerry was fairly small. I forget exactly what the number is, but it was small enough that it was an issue. And at that point, a number of groups around the country, and including some here in Minnesota, became interested in being able to verify the accuracy of our vote counting. And so we worked with some of those groups, and again persuaded the legislature to include this as a part of our post-election activity, in fact, to audit the accuracy of our voting equipment. And so after the canvasses take place at the county level, but before the state canvass, each county does one of these random audits of anywhere from 3 to now 13 precincts. And what we'll do is we'll take the ballots for those randomly selected precincts, and we will manually count the votes for, this year we'll do U.S. Representative and Governor. 2 years from now, we will do President, U.S. Senator, and U.S. Representative. And again, all we're trying to do there is to demonstrate that the voting equipment that we were using did in fact accurately count all the ballots properly. And of course, if you're out there paying attention, and I know that the people in this audience will be doing that, this is also an opportunity for you to get a preview of what we're going to see in the recount, which is likely to start on November 29th.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mansky. We've invited folks from different parts of the state to try to get a sense of the different challenges in the canvassing and then the recount process. We have with us Rachel Smith, who's the elections manager for the largest county, Hennepin County, here in Minnesota. Let's start with Ms. Smith. Thank you.
Thanks, Larry. It's great to be here, and basically we're getting our preparation underway for the post-election review, which will take place next Monday, and the recount itself. Now, Hennepin County will be centrally counting all 425 precincts at the Hennepin County Government Center for this recount, and we have about close to 500,000 ballots that we'll be recounting. We think it will take us almost the full time length that we have, with about 25 tables, and we're going to be sectioning them off into about 5 sections with a deputy recount official in charge of each section to actually do the recount process. You know, Larry, I don't know what else you'd like me to add, but we are logistically, we are planning for long days, large volume, and just making sure that we're obviously being consistent throughout the county and consistent with other counties through the state.
And then we've got Kevin Corbid, who is from outstate Minnesota. Can you talk a little bit about some of the challenges in the process you'll be pursuing?
Yeah, thanks, Larry. And I'm not sure I'd say it's outstate. We're a county that stretches from Forest Lake down to Cottage Grove and Denmark Township, but it's kind of a unique county. It's certainly much smaller than the counties that Joe and Rachel work in. And I think it provides us some benefits. I think they have some challenges that counties our size don't have. And I frankly think that a county like Washington size has some benefits that even smaller counties don't have. I've got a fairly significant election staff. We've got 4 full-time people to help us. They're fully trained staff, and they certainly do a great job as we guide through elections. One thing we kind of forget here is that there is an enormous amount of work that happens at the county and the city level leading up to election day, especially at the county level now, where we're doing the accepting and rejecting of absentee ballots and having them counted. Starting Friday night, we're putting in very long days and long hours through that weekend leading up to election day. And frankly, I think there's been some questions about, were we expecting to have a recount again? My answer has always been, well, we were preparing for it. We didn't expect it to happen again, but we certainly are preparing for it. But it's something that we frankly would have rather not have to do each year after these major elections, because there's just so much work before the election. Washington County, we have about 145,000 registered voters. We had 103,000 voters cast ballots in the Tuesday's election. Give you a little bit of idea, we'll have 8 counting teams, 8 different precincts happening at one time at the County Government Center in Stillwater. And we'll have probably a total of about 50 staff working on our recount. Many of them will be city clerks that help us doing the reading. They are well-trained individuals as well as the county staff. In Washington County, we have already canvassed. We canvassed on Monday. I'm pleased to announce there were no changes to our results that we reported on election night. That's always a good thing. And we've also gone through our audit. So we picked 4 precincts to audit in the post-election review audit. We did that on Tuesday morning. We had one fairly large precinct, West Lakeland Township, with over 2,000 votes cast in it. 2 what I'd call medium-sized precincts of about 1,500 each, and then 1 small precinct of about 500. In that audit, we found that there was no change in the governor's race for any of the candidates involved in that governor's race in those 4 precincts. The only change we had was in 1 precinct where there was 1 fewer votes in the U.S. House race, and then 1 fewer votes for actually Tom Emmer in the governor's race. So there was 1 fewer ballot than we expected to have from the count on election night. So it was by far the cleanest audit we've had since 2006 when we started this process. Just to add kind of what we're doing now is, we've gone through the canvass, we've gone through the audit. Now we're really kind of doing 2 things. One is our normal post-election work. We have to have all the voter history, kind of wanding our rosters to make sure that if you voted, you get history in the system. That's a very time-consuming process that goes on. And the second thing we're doing is we're starting to fill data requests. I don't know, Joe and Rachel done this a lot longer than I have, but in the 2001, when I started, through 2008, I don't recall getting a data request related to an election after the election. In 2008, we got a lot of them, about 2-3 weeks after the election. This year, we got them about Wednesday morning. So I was returning to work about 3 hours after I had left Wednesday morning, and the first data request was already in our email. And so we'll spend the next, up until the 29th, trying to fill the data requests so that on the 29th we can move into the recount stage. And so that's kind of what we're doing to prepare in Washington County. Certainly we weren't expecting it, but we're well prepared for the recount to occur.
Thank you, Kevin Corbid, who helps to coordinate or does coordinate elections for Washington County. I want to put a question to the panel and have you jump in. One of the real concerns you hear from people is, can we trust this? What is the protection against, any county kind of stuffing the ballot box or changing results? What are the protections in our system, if there are any protections? Mr. Mansky?
Well, as I described, we have this parallel system of keeping track of the voters, which is independent from keeping track of the votes cast. And the real beauty of our system, in our view, is that we have the best of both worlds. We have a paper-based system which we can count and compile votes from electronically. But at the end of the day, we still have all these paper source documents that have your votes on them, and that you don't need me to verify the result. Anybody in this room could do that. And anybody in this room could also go through the documents that come back from the polling place on how many people voted, which is to say how many people signed the roster. And you don't have to believe any of us. You can actually look at the roster, which is what the campaigns did 2 years ago. They got copies of all the rosters, and they likely will do the same thing this year. So you probably can trust all of us, but you don't have to. Our system is not based on trust. Our system is based on the ability to independently verify everything.
Thank you very much, Joe Mansky. Kevin Corbid, when you think about this process and the steps from the work you do and the people in your office to the canvassing board to the state canvassing board, could you walk us through the different levels of oversight that would go on? I mean, obviously you've got people in your office that are going through this. Who else is going to be going through the counting, the recounting, the making sure the ballots and the votes add up?
Sure. Certainly during the recount, we're not alone in that endeavor. It's interesting where if you've seen the recount happen in 2008, you'll have a reader in the middle of a table, and right to either side of them is a representative of the candidates involved in the recount. And so they are about as close as you can come. We tell them don't touch the ballots. That's certainly a key item in the recount. Actually, a funny story in our audit, yesterday, one of the ballots slipped off a fairly large pile we had, and there was a member of the election integrity group that was observing, and I've never seen her jump so quickly to get out of her chair away from the ballot. She felt that if it touched her, that there was going to be some kind of repercussion. So she jumped up, stood back, put her hands up, and it was pretty interesting. But so certainly the candidates are involved. We had a lot of media watching the activities in our counting of the recount. There was a member of the media at our audit on Tuesday. In our canvass board meeting, we had members of both political parties at the canvass board, and they got copies of the state abstracts, and we were done to make sure that what we're presenting to our county canvassing board was correct. And so certainly there are a lot of people that are not just county officials or city officials that are involved in this process as well.
Thank you. Rachel Smith from Hennepin County, can you give us a sense of what you do in Hennepin County in terms of ballot security? Because a lot of this is going to depend on making sure that the ballots, the votes, and the material around them are secure and not been tampered with.
Yeah, in fact, that's what I've been spending a lot of my time on for the last few days, is securing the ballots. And basically what we're doing in Hennepin County is the cities are transporting their materials to us, and remember, all the voted ballots are in what are called transfer cases, which are basically cardboard boxes, but then they have what's a sticker, and that sticker is sealed over the box so that you know that they have not been tampered with, and they're signed by the election judges in the polling place. So your chain of custody is basically secured from the polling place to the last point, which is Hennepin County. In this case, we've been working with the Hennepin County Attorney's Office and the Sheriff's Office, and all of the election material is being intake somewhat like evidence in a crime scene. It's barcoded, described, photographed, and then it's put into a room in which it's labeled by city. 2 people have to be present in the room at all times. There is a log at all times of anyone that enters the room, and only 1 person has the key to the room at this point. So we're taking a lot of steps to ensure that our materials are safe and secure, and then they're also guarded by a sheriff from the Hennepin County Sheriff's Office 24/7.
Larry, can I just add a little piece to that too?
Kevin Corbid from Washington County.
With that ballot security, and I think what people also need to realize, though, is a lot of the material that we're working with that we'll utilize either in a recount and a contest, we're asked to be doing stuff with it now as election administrators. And so we're not able to just take everything that we've gathered as part of this election, put it in a room, and no one ever go in there, because then we wouldn't be able to do our work. We've got to get the voter history done. We've got to get the election registrations entered in the system. And so there is this kind of a push and pull to secure them as best we can, but also know that we need to have our election staff have access to that to actually do the work they're required to do. We can't take 5 weeks off here and just segregate it all and not touch it again. And so, if someone thinks that it's improper that our election staff have access to stuff, we have to have access to that stuff and work with it. But it's key for us as administrators is to make sure we're doing it in a reasonable way, get it resecured, make sure we have everything that we need when the recount does occur in a few weeks.
Thank you, Kevin Corbid. Rachel Smith, I just want to come back to the chain of custody and the documentation that is obviously very important. Does that chain of custody begin as soon as the ballots close, the place of election closes? It's 8 p.m., the doors are locked, the last voter is gone. Is that when it starts, or do we have a few hours there where things are kind of floating around?
Well, I think chain of custody almost begins the first point of the day, or even at the delivery of materials. The election judges are required to log all the unvoted ballots They're required to incident log any incident that occurs on election day. They are, we're constantly all day. There's always a certain number of election judges of different political parties required to be in the polling place at all times. Hennepin County has over 5,000 election judges working on any given day, usually somewhere between 10 and 12 election judges in a polling place. So all day they're keeping track and logging exactly what's going on in the polling place. And then at the point of closing, of course, there's sealing of the envelopes, the forms, the ballots are then again included in what's called a transfer case, or they're sealed and signed by the election judges and then transported that way. So by the time you get to a recount, you're actually breaking the seal on the ballots at that point in time.
So it's a very tight ship. From the moment that the doors open and people start voting in the morning, there's a lot of observation. You've got election judges from different political parties. It's not like there's just one team on the field. And then you've got, at the end of the day, when ballots have been read into the optical scanner, they're put into these carrier cases with a seal on top of them that are signed by the slew of election judges representing different parties. Is that generally the picture?
That's correct, Larry. And in fact, once the polls close, it's open to the public. And we did see in 2010, this election, there were public observers, either through challengers appointed by the political parties, observing the closing process. And in some cases, we're actually following the election judges from the polling place to the City Hall to drop off the ballots.
Great. Thank you very much, Rachel Smith. Joe Mansky, I just want to come back to the timeline again. I've heard just confusion about it. We've talked about the steps from going from the unofficial results to the official results, the canvassing by both the county and the state. Walk us through where the recount fits in, where you actually start the next step of hand counting every ballot cast. Does that begin immediately after the results become official?
Actually, this time around, it is not going to happen that way, although hypothetically it could. And interestingly, and of course, every Secretary of State has their own way of doing business. When I worked for the Secretary of State, we used to do as many of our recounts as possible before the state canvass. And the reason for that was just the difficulty of rounding up the 4 judges to meet on the canvassing board. So it was our practice for an election that was held on a Tuesday. We generally would start the recounts on Thursday, and we would work through the weekend and so on, and try to get everything wrapped up by the date of the state canvassing board. The last 2 secretaries of state, including the current Secretary of State, have chosen to defer all the recounts until after the state canvass. So, using that model of operating, you have the election day. The county canvassing boards then are required to meet and canvass their results between the 3rd day after the election and the 10th day after the election. And of course, the 10th day is this Friday. And then the state canvassing board meets 3 weeks after election day, which is after all the counties have canvassed and after all these post-election reviews have taken place. Technically speaking, you could then start the recount on the day after the canvassing board met, but since that day is the day before Thanksgiving, I think the choice was made to wait until the following Monday. Now, I will also tell you that even though the state recounts are all technically automatic, I never started a recount before personally talking to the losing candidate and giving them an opportunity to waive it. And occasionally you would find a losing candidate who was prepared to say, yeah, I'm okay with the result, and I'll waive the automatic recount. So it's certainly within Representative Emmer's power to say that he's satisfied with the result and he's willing to waive it. From what I read in the news, he may not be inclined to do that, but he could do that if he wanted to.
Thanks. I have a hunch you're right. Let me just make sure that we've got this right. After the state canvassing board certifies the results and makes them official. Then the recount starts with all the counties beginning this process of going back and counting by hand in front of representatives of both campaigns, the Emmer campaign, the Dayton campaign. That's right?
That is exactly right. And again, operating at a much larger scale than most of the recounts that we do, but in exactly the same fashion. And for those of you who are listening to this on the radio, for those of us who are actually touching the ballots, the two observers from the two parties would be about as close to me as you could imagine, and not be inappropriate. But the reason for that is they need to see everything. And I will tell you one thing, that I've been conducting recounts for state races since 1984, and I can't say that I have ever had a recount where both of the parties were not certain of what the count was after the recount, that one of them is going to be unhappy with it. And they may well have other issues with the election, like as we saw 2 years ago with the absentee voting or some other aspect of it. But the good thing about our recount method is that both parties get to see every ballot, that they personally get to witness how every ballot is marked. And again, I think that is a really important part of our recount methodology.
Kevin Corbid, you're outside the Twin Cities. You may have a different dynamic over there in Washington County. My sense is there's a lot of suspicion, and it's kind of free-floating anxiety about, ballots disappearing or ballots arriving that weren't cast by eligible voters, and then the recount process. What do you say to people who are just suspicious of, fishy stuff going on?
As an administrator, I think the system works quite well. I think we got to realize, and Rachel mentioned, there was 4,000, what are basically volunteer election judges that serve, 5,000 in Hennepin County alone. We give them very tough jobs. I mean, election judge jobs are not easy. We ask them to get, in some cases, to the polls by 6 in the morning. We have them work till 8 o'clock in a lot of cases. We used to give them the hardest job of the whole day at the end of the day with the absentee ballots. We've solved that problem now, which is going to be a huge improvement in this recount. I don't think that can be underscored on how much better the counties and the cities have handled absentee ballots compared to 2008. I mean, it's just going to be an enormous difference. But I think that there are so many checks and balances that people aren't aware of. And then part of our problem too, I think, and I hate to complain about some of this stuff, but there's so many different rules in elections state to state and all of our news now is national. And so I know I'll work at the counter doing absentee balloting during the election process, just because everybody has to pitch in. There's just so much to do. And people walk up to me and they'll say, well, these don't get counted until after election day, right? Well, no, we count them before. Well, these don't get counted unless there's a close race, right? No, they all get counted. I mean, they all think they know so much about the election, some of which is true and some of which is not in Minnesota, that I think it breeds some suspicion that if we're doing something different than what they've heard on CNN or Fox or whatever they're getting their news from, they're confused or they don't understand the process. And so we try to do the best we can to explain to folks what we're doing, why we do it, and how it leads to a good election. I think it would take so many people involved in the election process to make a change or to do something nefarious that you'd need to have a whole bunch of people in on it, and that's not likely to occur. In the counties, I know we've got a whole bunch of nonpartisan folks that work hard to do their best, election judges as well. I mean, the phrase that I use to folks now is that I used to care who won elections. I don't care anymore. Now what I care about is that someone wins and by a lot. That's what I care about, and I think that's basically how election officials think. They don't care who the winners are. They just care that it runs well, it goes smoothly, we get a result, and we hope that it's by a lot.
And there's not a recount.
That's exactly right.
Joe Mansky, let me ask you, I think of you as kind of the dean of elections, election administration here in Minnesota. You've been through a lot of elections, and you've been an integral part in helping to shape the rules and the process and the way things are done. We had a situation on election night in Hennepin County where there were about 400,000 votes that were incorrectly added to the total. Does that strike you as an absolutely inconceivable kind of mistake? Or, I mean, how would you suggest people understand that, given your experience here in Minnesota?
You know, I'll tell you, Larry, if that's the worst thing that ever happens to us, we're okay. You'd be amazed at some of the things that I have heard on election night over the years. Now, I'll just tell you one.
This is other states?
No, this is in Minnesota, and I won't mention the county because I'm scanning the audience here, trying to see if I see anyone from that county who's here. But in a primary election, the ballots being transported back to a counting center, and this is during the days when the ballots were being transported somewhere else to be counted, got wet, and so they couldn't go through the ballot counters, and so the county auditor called me and was in a state of panic and wanted to know what to do. And of course, I'm not exactly sure how to solve that problem, but I suggested, why don't you put the ballots in a microwave and dry them out? And they did, and that worked. It's, you know, things happen. Remember, this is an incredibly complex activity going on in over 4,000 locations with over 20,000 volunteers. And the expectation of the public, and I think justifiably, is that we be perfect. And we strive toward perfection, but you know, we all also work long days. Everybody who is sitting up at this table today got up that morning at about 4:30 in the morning and worked the entire day without a lunch break, without dinner break. And then, am I surprised that you see a small error occur during the day? No, I'm surprised we don't see more of them. But again, Larry, the process that we have here in Minnesota, where we do have the audit procedures and where we do have the documents that we can check, make it possible that even if something like that occurs, and you don't want it to occur, but you know, the reality is that that will happen periodically, that it's easy to recover from, and that it's less of a big deal than most people imagine.
Larry, can I just add one thing to that too? I think it goes back to what Joe mentioned,
Kevin Corbid,
about the need or the want for instantaneous results on election night. The law now gives counties the ability to count absentee ballots after Tuesday. But frankly, I don't know any county that did that because we are so nervous about the public's reaction to that, not having as full of a count as possible come Tuesday night. I know in my county at 9 o'clock we were getting calls from folks wondering why we didn't have more results on our website. This is an hour after the polls closed. And so, you know, and frankly what happens when those results get modemed from the precincts, we have 90 in Washington County, she's got 425 in Hennepin County. They get modemed into our offices. We check them to make sure that what we're putting on the website looks reasonable, that it doesn't look crazy, that there's not all the votes for a precinct for the same candidate, that the percentages add up to 100, hopefully, when we percentage them. You know, all those kind of things, kind of a reasonableness test. And then they get put out there, because if we don't, we've got the press calling, the public calling, candidates calling. Back in 2008, we had CNN calling because they were trying to call the U.S. Senate race, why we didn't have a precinct reporting. I mean, that was ridiculous. And so, you know, there is so much of this intense need to have it right away, clashing with our desire to have it right. You know, I would love to have the ability to see those precinct results come into us. We print off reports, we look at them, we test them for more than just reasonableness, but make sure that they match what the precincts are giving to us, and then we put it on the website. Frankly, I don't think that's okay. I mean, I think that's the public will not go for that. You know, but I think what I would make as a comment here, in 2012, if we're handling absentee ballots the same way, and in Washington County we have 17,000 instead of 7,000 for this election, there's very little chance we'll be done counting on Tuesday. And so we may have to go into Wednesday and count. And if all of a sudden we're adding 2,000 or 3,000 votes to our totals in a county like Washington or a county like Joe's or Rachel's, those results could change a lot. And so either we have to get the public to be aware of that potential or possibility, or we have to talk about, you know, how we get results to the public. I'm not surprised by the error that was made in the, you know, it's not an error in counting, it's an error in reporting the results, and that's a big difference. And so I felt bad for Rachel, and I heard it happen on election night, but it's certainly something that could happen to any one of the 87 county auditors or election officials in the state. There's no doubt about that.
Thank you, Kevin Corbid. Rachel Smith, could you give us a sense of what's happened since election night to make sure that this mistake in reporting was corrected and that it's not a mistake in the counting of the ballots?
Right. As Kevin mentioned, that this was in Hennepin County, it was a reporting error. It was not a counting error. So we discovered it within 45 minutes. It was fixed and on our website within 45 minutes. Obviously it was very easy to tell because it basically doubled the in-person numbers for all candidates, not just, it was not limited to certain candidates, it was everyone, the local races as well. And our first inclination was to remove it from the website, get it down, but we had figured out what the problem was faster than we could take it down. So the idea was replace it as fast as we can to get the correct information on the website. After that point, we looked at the numbers. We felt fairly certain that they were accurate. Our local, we work with 46 cities, and they also are reviewing the results as they're coming in and letting us know if they see any issues or problems. We felt very confident at the end of election night that we were reporting accurately. We went to bed for a few hours and came back. The next day, then what we did is began going through the 425 precincts, not just the in-person, but the absentee totals as well. So now that we go through what are called the tapes and comparing the tapes against how many people walked through or how many absentee ballots were cast. We have 850 of those to go through in a matter of 24 to 48 hours. We went through those one by one. Everything looked great. Same report, what we did at the end of the night on election night. And then again, our Hennepin County Canvassing Board met on Monday and certified the vote totals.
Great. Thank you very much, Rachel Smith from Hennepin County. Kevin Corbid, got a couple questions here. Please describe the process of responding to data practices requests. How soon after a request is submitted must you respond? And will this kind of timeliness or lack of timeliness affect future possible legal action?
In general, data practices requests must be answered in a reasonable amount of time. The law doesn't tell you it's 2 days, 10 days, 15 days. It's a reasonable amount of time. One of the difficulties with the data requests that you get in the elections area is many of the documents they're asking for have some private information on it. The rosters have birth dates on it. Those have to come off. The envelopes for absentee ballots either have the last four of Social Security, the driver's license. Those need to come off. And so it's not as simple as just shoving through 13,000 documents through our copy machine and off they go to one of the candidates or the parties that have asked for it. We then have to redact it. So you're taking a black marker and going through 13,000 pages to make sure you get birth dates off. Many of you who know that you've used marker over a document, usually you can see right through that. So what we're doing is actually making a copy, markering and redacting all the private information, then you got to copy it again. And then frankly what we're going to do this year is scan it. So we have scanned copies of all these things. I would argue, and this is probably of some up for debate by folks who ask for data versus folks who deliver the data to them, is that it depends on what else is going on too. I mean, we have some work to do with the rosters to make sure that we get all of our work done. And do we stop all of that to fill the data request? Do we do it concurrently? So that affects some of our timelines as well. But I would say that certainly most counties will deliver this as quickly as we can, and certainly I think there's going to be a desire to have it by the parties that have asked for it prior to the recount occurring, and that's our goal because frankly we don't want to be doing data practices requests while we're also trying to do the recount starting on the 29th.
So the 29th is the magic date?
Well, for us it is. I think they probably want it a little bit sooner, but we're going to try to, the requests so far in Washington County are for about 35,000 pieces of paper, most of which have to be redacted in some way. And so it's just time consuming. Again, I mentioned I had 4 full-time election staff. That's it. These folks don't have a whole lot more than that. And we've got other things we need to do. And so we try to balance our time and get their requests filled as quickly as possible, but there's also competing interests for our time.
Thank you very much, Kevin Corbid. Rachel Smith, does every county have an election manager or director? Are they volunteers, hired staff, appointed? How does that work?
Well, actually, it varies a little bit throughout the state. Many of the metro counties do have an election manager or election director with a full-time election staff. However, outside of the metro county, they can either be appointed or elected, and technically they're the county auditor is kind of their technical term that they're elected under. And generally the county auditor has a lot more functions than just elections, so they do multiple tasks. But however, generally their population is a little bit smaller, but the metro counties are the ones that I think all of us have a designated election director.
And are those officials tend to be in those offices for a while, or is there a lot of turnover? I mean, do we tend to see the same faces, and so there's a kind of a network or community of people, or is it more transient?
No, it's a very, and I'm sure Joe can talk a little bit too about the same faces from his time at the Secretary of State. These, the election officials, we meet annually. There is relatively little turnover, although there are some retirements coming. But generally they have they've done some really great succession planning as well. So we're always looking for people to enter the world of elections, of course, but generally the population is pretty.
Do you think the recounts are advertisement for getting into this, or discouragement?
Larry, I would add too, Larry,
Kevin Corbid.
I would say Minnesota, though, it's much different. I mean, you've got county auditors with staffs maybe of 2 or 3 in their entire office, and they do elections, they do taxation, they oftentimes do license centers, they oftentimes do a whole bunch of different things. And so when a recount comes about in those outstate counties, and just like in my county, my department does taxation too, we're preparing to send truth and taxation notices out here in the middle of November, and it's a laborious effort as well. And so you've got these auditors who are hoping to finish elections on November 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and election stops. They switch right into taxation. If they've got this recount happening, there is some very difficult times in those smaller counties with very small staffs, and they're kind of jack of all trades, and so they've got probably as difficult of a time with 4,000 ballots in a county as Rachel or I or Joe with hundreds of thousands of ballots in a county.
Thank you, Kevin Corbid. Joe Mansky, what did you see as the biggest problems on Election Day? What were the challenges? Did you see problems with illegal voting? I mean, long lines. What was it that really kind of stood out for you this time around?
I'll tell you, the one thing that really struck me is how quiet it was. And I can gauge that by how often our phone was ringing during the day. And my general rule of thumb is that if we can survive to 7:30 in the morning, that we're okay for the rest of the day. And which means that we got all the polling places open, that our election judges showed up, that the voting equipment is working, and so on. And we had relatively few calls during the period from 5:30 to 7:30 in the morning, and even the rest of the day there was not that much phone traffic. My conclusion from that is that everything went fairly well. We had our normal assortment of calls, candidates campaigning too close to the polling place, or or someone didn't like not being able to use their marriage license in order to register to vote, things of that nature. But it was actually, it was a very quiet day, and then my conclusion from that is that from both the voter standpoint and from ours, it was a pretty successful day.
Your experience here over the number of years you've done this, how frequent or substantial is the problem with illegal voting?
You know, again, I've been doing this for 26 years, and I can't say that I have any personal knowledge or anything that's been reported to me of any illegal voting scheme that was either organized or in any way look to involve more than isolated individuals. Now, clearly, do we have people who vote while they're serving felony sentences? Well, obviously, the answer to that is yes. Do we probably have a few people who are not citizens voting? I'm presuming the answer to that is yes. In fact, I've had county auditors who live near our border with Canada tell me that they periodically have people that they know are Canadian citizens who have been voting in our elections. The system is not completely perfect, but it's pretty good. And again, I don't have and have never had the impression that there is any organized or systematic activity to violate either our voter registration laws or our voting laws.
Rachel Smith.
Yeah, I was just going to add that there were some legislative changes to address some of the felony issues and to flag on the roster. We're doing better internal checks with the Department of Corrections. The other thing is that we actually had a probation officer on staff at Hennepin County Elections to address any questions that came up in the polling place. And that was actually really successful for us. The probation officer did get several calls and basically worked with voters who maybe weren't sure about their status, and they were actually able to look up in live time and give them the information that they needed.
Kevin Corbid, we're going to have a recount. This is obviously a pretty close election. For folks out there who are thinking, geez, in a close election, here we've got Joe Mansky telling us that he knows of illegal voting. Do you think there's enough of that going around that it could affect the outcome of this election?
No, I don't think so. Certainly, any one of us would, wouldn't want to say there's none that occurs. I mean, obviously, that we had about 30 or 40 individuals that were identified in Washington County that were potential felons who voted in the 2008 election, and our county attorney's office and county sheriff have been doing investigations on all of those. So certainly, I think there are some cases when people that are ineligible to cast ballots do that, and then for the most cases, it's not errors by the election judges, because in those cases, if they are challenged as a felon, they go through all the right questions to ask if they've completed their sentence. They do all the right things at the polling place, and that person still certifies that they're eligible, so we let them vote. And so I don't think it's an error in the system. I think these are errors by voters who aren't frankly eligible and go ahead and cast ballots, and we've got ways to take care of that. And there's, after the election, unfortunately, but there's some pretty stiff penalties for folks who do that. There's a few cases where we think we have folks that voted both in Wisconsin and Minnesota as being a border county, although I would tell you that most of the ones we thought were potential matches weren't, because most folks that have the ability to, or try to do the matches, don't have all the data they need to make sure those are the same two people in Wisconsin and Minnesota. So almost all those turned out to be non-matches and non-issues. So certainly I don't think it's significant. I think we all do well as administrators to try to root out as much of that as possible, to do whatever we can to make sure there's as few of those things happening. But I don't think there's a systematic or huge problem in the system.
Thank you, Kevin Corbid. We're just about out of time. Before we conclude, though, I want to ask Joe Mansky. We learned from mistakes. 2008 led to a pretty significant set of rule changes and new law. What about 2010? Do you have on your radar screen some things that should be changed, or do you feel like things are perfect now?
Well, I would agree with something that Kevin said earlier, and that is that we probably do need to make some small changes to the absentee processing that's going on, over the last weekend of the election period and then on election day. I'm not sure that the system we have set up right now can accommodate the very large number of absentees that we're going to see in 2012. So I would like to see the legislature revisit that issue. And another thing that I think is fair to bring up, and especially since we have a few members here in the audience or maybe listening to us, and that is the margin for the automatic recount. The 1/2 of 1% was originally established for legislative recounts, and it was meant to take the place of a hard target, which in those days was 100. That we would do an automatic legislative recount anytime a legislative race was decided by 100 or fewer voters. And there was some interest in making that more flexible depending on the race and the number of votes cast. And it was later expanded to cover the statewide offices. My personal view is that 1/2 of 1% is a much too large of a target for an automatic recount for a statewide office. That margin needs to go down to, I think, more responsibly reflect the kinds of recounts that should be done at public expense.
Last question, Joe Mansky. In your almost quarter century doing this, have you seen elections, statewide elections, where there's been a net change between the candidates of, let's say, more than 8,700 votes?
I can't say that I have. In fact, of all the recounts I've done 3 where the results have changed, but those were all extremely close races, as was the race in 2008. That Senate race statistically was extremely close. The margin between Coleman and Franken, remember, was .0000078.
That's a lot of zeros.
That's a lot of zeros.
Okay, I want to thank this wonderful panel. We now have a second panel coming up, but please join me in thanking Kevin Corbid, Rachel Smith, and Joe Mansky.